The sky above Kent Prime burned red as another crystal tower fell. Commander Veltar watched from his underground bunker as the beautiful spire that had stood for 10,000 years cracked and tumbled into dust. The Vorthak had been eating his world for 3 months now, and there was nothing left to do but hide and wait to die. Veltar was tall and thin like all his people, with skin so clear you could almost see through it. The Zalathi had never been fighters. They were builders and thinkers, makers of beautiful things and solvers of hard problems. Their whole civilization was based on peace and logic. They had no armies worth the name, no weapons that could hurt the monsters crawling across their world. The Vorthak were not like any enemy they had ever imagined. They looked like giant insects made of metal and flesh, with too many legs and mouths full of spinning teeth. But the worst part was how they ate everything. Not just people and animals, but plants and buildings and even the dirt itself. They turned everything into more of themselves, growing bigger and stronger with every bite. "Sir, another district has gone silent," reported Lieutenant Keshina from her station. Her voice shook as she spoke. Like all of them, she had not slept properly in weeks. The constant sound of the Vorthak eating their world above made sleep almost impossible. Veltar nodded but said nothing. What could he say? They had sent messages to every friendly world they knew. The Altarians were too far away to help. The Biu, Centauri Council, was fighting their own war. The few other races they had met either could not fight the Vorthak or would not risk their own people for strangers. The bunker shook as something heavy landed on the ground above them. Through the thick walls they could hear the sound of drilling and scraping. The Vorthak had found them again. "How long until they break through?" Veltar asked. 6 hours, maybe 7, replied Chief Engineer Moldan. His usually steady hands trembled as he checked the readings on his screen. The lower seals might hold a bit longer, but not much. Veltar closed his eyes and thought of his daughter. Zayla was only 12 years old, hiding in a bunker on the other side of the city with her mother. He had not spoken to them in 2 days. The communication lines kept getting cut as the Vorthak dug deeper. "Sir," Keshina called out, "I'm getting strange readings from the emergency beacon array." The emergency beacon was their last desperate hope, an ancient device built by the first Zalathi to explore space. It could send a message to every known world at once. The message would be simple: help us, or we all die. But in 3 months of broadcasting, no one had answered. "What kind of readings?" Veltar asked, walking over to look at her screen. "Someone is trying to connect to our communication system. The signal is very weak and strange. I've never seen anything like it." Veltar felt his heart beating faster. Could it be help at last? Or was it just another cruel trick of hope? "Can you clean up the signal?" Keshina worked at her controls for several minutes while the bunker continued to shake. Finally, a voice came through the speakers. It was unlike any voice they had ever heard, lower and rougher than a Zalathi voice with odd sounds they could barely understand. "Zalathi Command, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the Human Expeditionary Force. We received your distress call. Help is coming. Hold the line." The bunker fell silent except for the sound of the Vorthak digging above. Veltar stared at the communication screen as if it might explain what they had just heard. "Human?" whispered Keshina. "I have never heard of this species." Veltar quickly moved to the main computer and searched their databases. Human, humanity, Earth, nothing. These people were completely unknown to them. They came from a world the computer did not recognize, from a part of space that was not even on their star charts. "Sir, they're sending another message," Keshina announced. This time the voice was clearer, as if the humans were learning how to use their communication system better. "Commander Veltar, I understand you can hear us. We know you don't know who we are, but we're real and we're coming to help. Can you send us the location of your world?" Veltar's mind raced. These humans could be anyone or anything. They might be worse than the Vorthak. They might be lying about wanting to help. But as another section of the ceiling cracked above them, he realized they had no choice left. "This is Commander Veltar of the Zalathi Defense Force. We don't know who you are, but yes, we need help badly. Our world is dying." "We understand, Commander. We've seen this kind of attack before. Send us your location, and we'll be there, as fast as our ships can fly." Veltar looked around the bunker at his people. They were all staring at him, waiting for his decision. These were the last military officers of his entire race. If he was wrong about these humans, there would be no one left to protect the survivors. "Keshana, send them our coordinates," he ordered. "Sir, are you sure?" she asked. "We know nothing about these people. They could be worse than the Vorthak." Veltar thought about his daughter again, hiding in darkness while monsters ate her world. "Nothing could be worse than what we're facing now. Send the coordinates." The message went out across space toward the unknown world called Earth. Within minutes, another reply came back. "Coordinates received, Commander. We're loading our ships now. Our fleet will reach you in 4 days. Can you hold out that long?" 4 days. Veltar looked at the ceiling where the cracks were growing wider. The Vorthak would break through this bunker in hours, not days. But maybe some of his people could last that long in deeper shelters. "We'll try," he replied. "That's all anyone can do," the human voice said. "Commander, I want you to know something. My name is Jake Morrison, and I'm bringing every ship and every fighter we can spare. We've never met your people before, but when someone calls for help, humans answer. It's just what we do." The connection ended, leaving the bunker quiet except for the sounds of destruction above. Veltar sat down heavily in his chair and tried to understand what had just happened. In their darkest hour, when all known friends had abandoned them, strangers from across the galaxy had heard their cry for help. "Sir," said Moldan quietly, "who do you think these humans are?" Veltar looked up at the cracking ceiling where the Vorthak continued their relentless digging. Somewhere up there beyond the smoke and destruction, ships from an unknown world were racing through space to save people they had never met. "I don't know," he answered, "but I think we're about to find out." The bunker shook again, harder this time. Chunks of concrete fell from the ceiling as the Vorthak drilling grew louder. In 4 days they would have their answer, if any of them lived that long. The human ships appeared at the edge of the Kenth system like ghosts coming out of empty space. One moment there was nothing, and the next moment 12 metal vessels hung in the darkness between the stars. They were not beautiful like Zalathi, crystal ships, or smooth like Altarian biocraft. They looked rough and hard, covered in thick armor and bristling with weapons. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship, the UES Liberty, and studied the readings on his screens. The planet below was a mess. Red scars covered most of the surface where the enemy had been feeding. Smoke and fire rose from a dozen cities. The blue oceans were turning brown with pollution and death. "Well, this is worse than I expected," said Commander Lisa Hayes, his second in command. She was a small woman with short black hair and eyes that never seemed to blink. "These Vorthak things have really done a number on this world." Morrison nodded as he watched the tactical display update. The enemy ships moved across the planet like hungry animals, landing and taking off as they moved their army from one feeding ground to the next. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. "Major Clark, what do you think?" Morrison asked. Major Ryan Clark stepped forward from where he had been studying the enemy formations. He was a big man with scarred hands and the kind of face that had seen too many battles. "Sir, I count at least 50,000 enemy ground units, probably more. They've got air support, heavy weapons, and they're dug in deep. It's going to be ugly." Morrison almost smiled. Ryan always said things were going to be ugly, and he was usually right. But ugly fights were the kind humans were best at. "Dr. Miller, have you made contact with the Zalathi yet?" Dr. Susan Miller looked up from her communication station. She was older than the others, with gray hair and the patient look of someone who had spent her life talking to aliens. "Yes, Captain. I'm connected to their commander now." "But sir, these people are nothing like us." "What do you mean?" "They're very tall and thin, almost like living glass. Their whole culture is based on peace and logic. They've never fought a real war before. When I showed them our battle plans, their commander actually fainted." Morrison turned to look at the main screen where the face of Commander Veltar appeared. The alien was indeed strange-looking. Over 7 feet tall, but so thin he looked like he might break in a strong wind. His skin was so clear that Morrison could see the blue liquid that must be his blood moving underneath. Commander Veltar, this is Captain Morrison. We're here to help. The alien's voice was high and musical like wind chimes in a breeze. Captain Morrison, we are grateful beyond words. But I must ask, what kind of beings are you? Your ships, your weapons, everything about you is so violent. Morrison exchanged glances with his crew. This was always the hardest part of first contact, explaining to peaceful species what humans really were. Commander, we come from a world called Earth. It's not like your world. Where we come from, everything tries to kill everything else. The weather, the animals, the plants, even the ground under our feet. We had to learn to fight just to stay alive. Veltar's clear skin seemed to grow even paler. You mean your entire species evolved in constant warfare? Pretty much, Morrison said simply. But that's what makes us good at stopping things like the Vorthak. We know how to fight monsters because we've been doing it our whole lives. Dr. Miller leaned forward to speak. Commander Veltar, I've been studying your enemy. These Vorthak are very dangerous, but they're not perfect. They have weaknesses we can exploit. The problem is our methods might seem very harsh to your people. What do you mean? Veltar asked. Major Clark stepped into view of the camera. Sir, we're going to have to destroy large parts of your planet to kill these things. We're going to use fire, explosives, chemicals, and probably some other nasty stuff. A lot of your beautiful cities are going to be gone when this is over. Veltar was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he spoke in a voice so soft they could barely hear him. Captain Morrison, will any of my people survive if you do nothing? No, sir. These Vorthak will eat everything on your world. Every person, every animal, every plant. In a few months, there won't be anything left but more Vorthak. Then do what you must. Save who you can. Morrison nodded with respect. The alien might look fragile, but he had the courage to make hard choices. Commander, we're going to need your people to help us, but not in combat. Can you coordinate evacuation routes and safe zones? Yes, we can do that. But Captain, I must warn you, my people will not understand your methods. When they see what you do to fight the Vorthak, many will be frightened of you as well. We understand, Dr. Miller said gently. Commander, can you tell us why the Vorthak attacked your world? Do you know what they want? Veltar's image flickered as explosions lit up the sky behind him. They want to eat. That's all they do. They consume everything organic and use it to make more of themselves. We think they've already destroyed dozens of worlds this way. Commander Hayes leaned forward. So they're not just invading, they're reproducing. That changes things, Captain. We can't just beat them back. We have to kill every last one or they'll just grow their numbers again. Morrison turned to his crew. All right, people, you heard the man. This isn't just a rescue mission, it's an extermination. Major Clark, start loading the dropships. Commander Hayes, I want every weapon we have ready for deployment. Dr. Miller, keep talking to the Zalathi and try to calm them down when they see what we're about to do. Sir, Dr. Miller said carefully, there's something else. I've been monitoring Zalathi communications, and they're terrified of us. They keep using words that translate to Deathbringers and Void-Touched. I think they see us as monsters. Morrison looked back at the screen where Commander Veltar was still waiting. The alien was trying to hide it, but Morrison could see the fear in those strange, clear eyes. The Zalathi were peaceful people facing their first real war, and now they had called for help from a species that looked like their worst nightmares. Commander Veltar, Morrison said, I know we seem frightening to you. Where we come from, that's often necessary. But I want you to understand something. We didn't come here to conquer or to take anything from you. We came because when people are dying and they ask for help, humans answer. It's just what we do. Veltar stared at him for a long moment. Captain Morrison, may I ask you something? Of course. Why would your people risk their lives for strangers? You could have ignored our message and stayed safe on your own world. Morrison thought about the question. It was something aliens always asked, and he had never found a good way to explain it. Finally, he said, because we know what it's like to be alone and afraid. Every human child grows up hearing stories about the times when we almost didn't make it. when everything seemed lost. We swore we would never let that happen to anyone else if we could help it. The connection flickered again as more explosions shook the Zalathi bunker. When the image cleared, Veltar was looking at Morrison with something that might have been understanding. "Captain, my people are ready to help however we can. Just please try to save some of our world." "We'll do our best, Commander." Morrison out. The screen went dark, leaving the bridge quiet except for the hum of the ship's engines. Morrison looked around at his crew, these people who had traveled across the galaxy to fight monsters for strangers. "All right, people," he said. "Let's go show these Vorthak what happens when they mess with someone under human protection." The attack began before sunrise on the largest continent of Kenth Prime. Captain Morrison had decided not to give the Vorthak any warning. The first thing they would know about the humans was when the bombs started falling, high above the planet. The human ships opened fire with everything they had. Missiles screamed down from orbit, turning Vorthak feeding camps into balls of fire. The aliens had never seen weapons like these before. Their bioships, which had seemed so terrifying to the Zalathi, cracked and burned under the human assault, but the Vorthak were not helpless. As soon as they realized they were under attack, they launched their own ships and sent their ground forces racing toward the human landing zones. These were creatures born for war, with claws like swords and armor that could stop most weapons. They had eaten their way across dozens of worlds, and they were not afraid of anything. They had never fought humans before. Sergeant Danny Rodriguez was in the first wave of dropships that landed on the burning continent. He was a small man with dark skin and quick eyes, the kind of soldier who had survived a dozen battles by being faster and meaner than anything that wanted to kill him. As his ship touched down, he could see Vorthak warriors racing toward them, across the ruined landscape. "All right, Marines, this is what we came for," he shouted over the noise of the engines. "Remember, these things eat everything, so don't let them get their teeth into you." The dropship doors opened, and the humans poured out, weapons ready. The Vorthak hit them like a living wave of claws and teeth and metal, but the Marines were ready. They had studied these creatures for days, learning their weaknesses and planning their attacks. Private Kelly Thompson was barely 20 years old, but she fought like someone who had been born for war. When 3 Vorthak warriors surrounded her, she didn't run or call for help. Instead, she pulled the pins on her last 2 grenades and held them tight against her chest. "Come and get me, ugly," she yelled. The explosion took her and all 3 Vorthak with it. Sergeant Rodriguez saw it happen and felt his heart break a little. Kelly had been a good kid, always joking and making the others laugh. But she had died, like a true Marine, taking as many enemies with her as she could. The battle raged across the continent as more humans landed, and the Vorthak threw everything they had at the invaders. The aliens were strong and fast and hard to kill, but they had never fought an enemy that was willing to die to win. Every time they killed a human, 2 more seemed to take their place. In orbit, Captain Morrison watched the battle through his ship's cameras and tried not to think about how many of his people were dying down there. Commander Hayes stood beside him, calling out target coordinates to the gun crews. "Vorthak bioship coming up from the southern continent," she reported. "It's heading for the Liberty." Morrison looked at the tactical display. The enemy ship was huge, 3 times the size of his own vessel, covered in what looked like living armor. It was the kind of ship that could destroy a human vessel with 1 good hit. "All ships, concentrate fire on that bioship," he ordered. "Sir," Hayes said quietly, "our weapons aren't making much of a dent. That thing's armor is too thick." Morrison watched as the alien ship continued to close the distance. In a few minutes, it would be close enough to use its own weapons. He looked around the bridge at his crew, these people who had followed him across the galaxy to help strangers. "Signal the Boston," he said. "Tell Captain Carter to prepare for ramming speed." Hayes stared at him. "Sir, the Boston can't survive. A collision with that thing? Maybe not. But she can make a hole in it for the rest of us to shoot through." Down on the planet, the battle was turning into something the Vorthak had never seen before. The humans didn't just fight to survive. They fought like they enjoyed it. When their guns ran out of ammunition, they used knives. When their knives broke, they used their bare hands. When they were outnumbered 10 to 1, they laughed and fought harder. Major Ryan Clark led his squad through a Vorthak nest where the creatures were growing their young in pulsing egg sacs. The place was hot and humid and smelled like rotting meat, but the Marines pushed forward anyway. Clark carried a flamethrower that turned everything in front of him into fire. "Keep moving," he shouted as burning Vorthak young writhed and died around them. "Don't let any of these things escape." Behind him, Corporal Mike Davis carried a backpack full of explosives. He was leaving small charges on every egg sac they passed, timed to go off after they cleared the nest. It was ugly work, killing creatures, before they could even be born. But Davis had seen what adult Vorthak did to peaceful worlds. Sometimes ugly work was necessary work. The nest erupted in flames behind them as they emerged into daylight. Clark counted his people. He had started with 12 Marines, and now he had 7. Good people dead because the galaxy was full of monsters. But the nest was gone, and those Vorthak young would never grow up to eat another world. In space, Captain Carter received Morrison's order and smiled grimly. He was an old man with white hair and hands that shook a little, but his voice was steady when he spoke to his crew. "You heard the captain, people. We're going to ram that ugly thing and make a hole for the fleet. Any of you who want to use the escape pods, now's your time." Nobody moved. These were volunteers who had come to save a world full of strangers. They hadn't come this far to run away now. "Then let's show these bug-eyed monsters what humans do when someone threatens people under our protection," Carter said. "All engines, full power, take us in." The Boston accelerated toward the massive bioship like a bullet fired from a gun. The Vorthak vessel tried to turn away, but it was too big and too slow. Carter's ship hit it just below what looked like its main weapons cluster, punching through the living armor in a shower of sparks and alien blood. Both ships exploded together in a ball of fire that lit up the sky. But the Boston had done her job. The bioship was broken in half, its weapons silent forever. The other human ships moved in quickly to finish what Carter had started. On the planet below, the Vorthak were beginning to retreat. For the first time in their history as a species, they had met an enemy that was more vicious than they were. The humans didn't just fight to win. They fought like every battle was their last. Like losing meant the end of everything they cared about. "Sergeant." Rodriguez watched a group of Vorthak warriors running away from his position and shook his head in amazement. These were creatures that had terrified an entire galaxy, and they were running from a few hundred humans with guns. "Rodriguez to all units," he said into his radio. "The enemy is pulling back across the northern sector. They're actually retreating." The voice that answered was Major Clark, tired but alive. "Confirmed, Sergeant. Same thing here in the south. These things are running away." High above, Commander Veltar watched the battle from his underground bunker, unable to believe what he was seeing. The humans had been on his world for less than 2 days, and already the unstoppable Vorthak were in full retreat. But the cost had been terrible. He could see the smoking craters where human ships had crashed, the fields littered with the bodies of both species. "Are all humans like this?" he asked Dr. Miller, who was coordinating with his people from orbit. "Like what, Commander? So willing to die for others, so fierce." Dr. Miller was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was sad and proud at the same time. "Commander, humans have a saying. We leave no one behind. When someone calls for help, we answer. Even if it kills us. Especially if it kills us." Veltar looked at the screens showing the retreating Vorthak forces and tried to understand what he had witnessed. In 2 days, these strange beings from across the galaxy had done what no one thought possible. They had made the Devourers afraid. The battle for Kent Prime was over, but the world would never be the same. Where beautiful crystal cities had once stood, there were now fields of broken glass and twisted metal. The blue oceans had turned dark with smoke and chemicals. Most of the forests were gone, burned away in the fighting or poisoned by Vorthak bioweapons. Captain Morrison walked through what had once been the capital city of the Zelathi. His left arm was in a sling and burns covered half his face, but he was alive. Many of his people were not. Of the 5,000 humans who had come to this world, less than 3,000 were still breathing. The survivors worked quietly in the ruins, pulling bodies from the wreckage and marking safe zones for the Zalathi civilians. They moved like people who had done this before, who knew the terrible math of war. Every person saved had cost them friends and comrades. Commander Veltar met Morrison at what had been the Grand Assembly building. The tall alien looked even more fragile now, his clear skin showing cracks of stress and grief. But he was alive, and so were most of his people. The humans had kept their promise. "Captain Morrison," Veltar said, his musical voice barely above a whisper, "I do not have words for what you have done for us. You saved our entire species." Morrison looked around at the destroyed city. "At a hell of a price, Commander. Your world is going to take generations to heal from this." "But it will heal," Veltar replied. "Before you came, we had no future at all. Now we do because of the sacrifice your people made." That evening, the surviving humans gathered in a cleared area near the landing zone for what they called a remembrance ceremony. Morrison had seen these ceremonies after every major battle, and they never got easier. The Marines and ship crews sat in rough circles, sharing bottles of earth liquor and telling stories. Major Ryan Clark stood up first. His uniform was torn and dirty, and he limped from a leg wound, but his voice was strong. "I want to talk about Private Kelly Thompson," he said. "She was 20 years old and came from a farm in Ohio. She used to tell jokes that made no sense and laugh at her own stories." Other voices joined in, each person adding something they remembered about Kelly. How she always volunteered for the dangerous jobs. How she sent half her pay home to help her little brother go to college. How she died taking 3 Vorthak warriors with her rather than let them reach the civilians behind her. They talked about Captain Carter too, the old man who had rammed his ship into the enemy biovessel. About Sergeant Williams, who had held a position alone for 2 hours so his squad could evacuate wounded Zalathi. About dozens of others who would never see Earth again. Commander Veltar watched from a distance, trying to understand what he was seeing. The humans were not crying or wailing like his people did when they mourned. Instead, they were laughing and telling stories, raising their drinks to honor the dead. "Why do they celebrate?" he asked Dr. Miller, who stood beside him with tears in her eyes. "They're not celebrating death," she explained. "They're celebrating life. Each story they tell keeps their friends alive a little longer. It's how humans deal with loss. We remember the good things and try to learn from the bad ones." Major Clark finished his speech and raised a metal cup filled with whiskey. "They died so others could live," he said in a voice that carried across the entire gathering. "That's the only victory that matters. That's what makes us human." Every person in the crowd raised their own cup and repeated the words. "That's what makes us human." Veltar felt something break inside his chest. These people had crossed the galaxy to save his world, knowing they would die for it, not for money or territory or glory, but simply because it was the right thing to do. The next day, Dr. Miller worked to establish permanent communication links between Earth and Kenth Prime. The Zalathi computer systems were more advanced than anything humans had, but they had never been designed for military use. Miller spent hours teaching Zalathi engineers how to encrypt their signals and hide their communications from enemy scanners. "Dr. Miller," asked Engineer Moldan, "why did your people answer our call? We are strangers to you, and our worlds are very far apart." Miller paused in her work and looked at the tall alien. "Engineer, can I tell you about Earth?" Moldan nodded eagerly. All the Zalathi were curious about the world that had produced such fierce warriors. "Earth is not a kind planet," Miller began. "We have earthquakes that can swallow entire cities, storms that can level forests, volcanoes that can change the weather across the whole world. For most of our history, we were too busy fighting for survival to fight each other much." "That sounds terrible," Moldan said. "It was, but it also made us strong. Every generation of humans had to learn how to survive things that should have killed them. We learned that when everything seems hopeless, you keep fighting anyway. We learned that the only way to beat impossible odds is to never give up." She pointed to the ruined city around them. "When we heard your call for help, we heard the voice of people facing the same choice we've faced 1,000 times. Give up, and die, or fight and maybe live. We couldn't let you face that alone. Meanwhile, Captain Morrison was meeting with his surviving officers to plan their next move. Long-range sensors showed more Vorthak swarms moving through distant star systems. The threat was far from over. "Sir," Commander Hayes reported, "we're getting distress calls from 3 other systems. The Vorthak are spreading faster than we expected." Morrison nodded grimly. He had hoped they would have more time to rest and refit before the next battle. But the enemy wasn't going to wait for them to be ready. "What's our ship status?" "We have 8 vessels still combat-ready, sir. The others need major repairs before they can fight again. And we're down to less than 3,000 personnel total." Morrison looked at the tactical display showing the spread of Vorthak attacks. Each red dot represented a world under threat, billions of lives hanging in the balance. With their small force, they couldn't save everyone. They would have to choose which battles to fight. "Sir," Major Clark spoke up from his chair. The medics had ordered him to rest, but he refused to leave the planning session. "There's something else. The Zalathi want to help." "Help? How? Their people aren't fighters." "No, sir, but they're great with computers and communications. Commander Veltar thinks they can set up an early warning network. Let other worlds know when the Vorthak are coming. Give people time to evacuate or call for help." Morrison considered this. It wasn't much, but every little advantage helped when you were fighting an enemy that outnumbered you 1,000 to 1. "Dr. Miller," he called out, "can you work with the Zalathi to set up this network?" "Already started, Captain. We should have basic coverage of this sector within a week." As the meeting continued, Veltar stood on a balcony overlooking the human camp. His people were working alongside the humans now, learning their methods and sharing their own knowledge. It was the beginning of something new, an alliance between 2 very different species. But the Vorthak were still out there, eating their way across the galaxy. More worlds would call for help, and more humans would answer that call. Veltar understood now why these strange beings from the deadly world called Earth were willing to die for strangers. They had learned something in their struggle for survival that his peaceful people had never needed to know, that sometimes the only way to preserve life was to be willing to lose it. And that when everything seemed hopeless, when the monsters were at your door and no one else would help, humans would come running, even if it killed them, especially if it killed them. 6 months after the Battle of Kenth Prime, the galaxy had begun to change in ways no one had expected. The news of humanity's victory over the Vorthak spread from world to world like wildfire. For the first time in years, species that had been hiding in fear began to hope again. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of Deathworld Station, watching ships from a dozen different worlds dock at the massive facility. The station hung at the edge of known space, a fortress built from human steel and Zalathi crystal technology. It was ugly and beautiful at the same time, just like the alliance that had created it. "Admiral, the Altarian delegation has arrived," reported Commander Hayes. She wore new rank insignia now, promoted after leading 3 successful rescue missions to worlds under Vorthak attack. Her hair was streaked with premature gray, but her eyes still held the same steady determination they had always shown. Morrison nodded without taking his eyes off the ships. Altarians, Centauri, Rigelians, even some species he had never heard of before. All of them coming to learn what humans called the hard way of war. The Zalathi had been their first and best students. Under the guidance of Colonel Amy Foster, they had developed their own version of human determination. They called it the crystalline rage, a cold, calculated fury that burned like ice instead of fire. 3 weeks ago, they had won their first independent victory against a Vorthak probe force, destroying an entire swarm fleet without losing a single ship. "Commander Veltar is here to see you, sir," Hayes announced. Veltar entered the observation deck, but he was not the same fragile being Morrison had first met 6 months ago. The tall alien still looked like living glass, but now there was steel in his spine and fire in his clear eyes. He wore a uniform that mixed Zalathi crystal weaving with human military design, creating something entirely new. "Admiral Morrison," Veltar said, his musical voice carrying new strength. "The early warning network is complete. We now have sensors monitoring 17 star systems for Vorthak activity. Any contacts?" 3 probe fleets detected and destroyed before they could report back to the main swarm. The Rigelians handled 2 of them, and the Centauri took care of the 3rd. Both species used tactics they learned here. Morrison smiled with pride. The Rigelians were natural warriors, but they had always fought with honor codes and formal rules. Teaching them to fight dirty had been difficult, but necessary. The Centauri had been even harder, a species of philosophers who thought war was beneath them. Now both races had learned that sometimes survival required abandoning principles. "Sir," Hayes interrupted, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Outer Rim. It's the Mortak." Morrison and Veltar exchanged glances. The Mortak were legendary warriors, a species that had conquered half their local sector through pure military skill. If they were calling Deathworld Station, something big was happening. The main screen flickered to life, showing the scarred face of War Chief Grath. The Mortak looked like a cross between a bear and a lizard, with thick armor plates covering his entire body. His people were born for war, raised from birth to fight and die in glorious battle. "Human Morrison," Grath growled, his voice like grinding stone. "We require assistance." Morrison blinked in surprise. The Mortak asking for help was like the ocean asking for water. "What's your situation, War Chief?" "The Vorthak have learned. They no longer attack in simple swarms. They have studied our tactics and developed new strategies. My warriors are struggling." The words came out like they tasted bad. For a proud, warrior species like the Mortak, admitting they needed help was almost impossible. "We will send ships immediately," Morrison replied. "But War Chief, I want you to consider something else. Send some of your people here to train with us, not just to learn new tactics, but to understand why we fight the way we do." Grath's massive head tilted to one side. "You would teach us? We who have conquered 1,000 worlds?" "War Chief, conquering is easy. Surviving is hard. And right now, survival is the only victory that matters." 2 weeks later, Morrison watched as Mortak warriors trained alongside human marines on the station's combat decks. It was a strange sight. These massive creatures who had terrified the galaxy for centuries, learning to fight from humans half their size. "They are adapting quickly," observed Colonel Foster, as she watched a Mortak soldier practice urban warfare tactics with Sergeant Rodriguez. Foster had been promoted to Director of Allied Training, responsible for teaching the galaxy's warriors how to think like humans. "They're warriors born and bred," Morrison replied. "They just needed to learn that sometimes winning means being willing to lose everything." The test came sooner than expected. Long-range sensors detected a massive Vorthak fleet heading for the Altarian home system. Not just a feeding swarm, but what appeared to be their main force. Millions of bioships moving in perfect coordination, led by creatures the size of small moons. "Sir," Hayes reported, "the Altarians are requesting immediate assistance. They're evacuating their colonies, but they can't abandon their homeworld." Morrison looked at the tactical display showing the approaching enemy force. Even with all their allied ships, they were outnumbered at least 50-1. It was the kind of odds that should have made any sane commander retreat. Instead, he smiled. "Signal the fleet. All ships, prepare for departure. We're going to show these Vorthak what happens when they threaten the galaxy." The combined allied fleet that jumped into the Altarian system was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships flew alongside Zalathi crystal vessels and Mortak war barges. Centauri science ships had been converted into weapons platforms, while Rigelian fighters darted between the larger vessels like angry wasps. But it was not the ships that made the difference. It was the crews inside them, beings from a dozen different worlds who had all learned the same hard lesson, that sometimes you have to be willing to die for strangers. The battle lasted 3 days. When it was over, the Vorthak main fleet was scattered and broken, their bioships burning in the void between planets. The cost had been terrible. Nearly half the Allied fleet was destroyed or damaged beyond repair. But they had won, and more importantly, they had shown the galaxy that the Vorthak could be beaten. In the aftermath, as rescue ships searched for survivors among the wreckage, Morrison received a transmission that would become famous throughout known space. It came from a small trading vessel that had witnessed the battle from the edge of the system. Unknown fleet, this is Captain Zek of the merchant ship Wanderer. We saw what you did here. We saw you fight for people who weren't even your own species. We want you to know, the word is spreading. Every trader, every pilgrim, every wanderer in the galaxy is hearing the story. They're saying that when extinction comes calling, the humans answer. They're saying the Deathworlders never let anyone fight alone. Morrison looked around the bridge of his battered flagship at the crew that had followed him across the galaxy to fight monsters for strangers. They were tired and hurt and far from home, but they were alive, and so were the people they had sworn to protect. This is Admiral Morrison to all Allied vessels, he broadcast on the open channel. Today we prove something important, that the galaxy doesn't have to be afraid anymore, not as long as we stand together, not as long as we remember that every species, every world, every life is worth fighting for. He paused, looking out at the stars where more distress calls were undoubtedly waiting. There would be other battles, other worlds to save, other prices to pay. But now, they would not fight alone. To any species facing extinction, to any world, standing alone against the dark, he continued, his words being recorded and transmitted across the galaxy. You are not forgotten. The Deathworld Alliance is coming. We leave no one behind. The message spread from system to system, carried by traders and travelers and refugees. It became a promise that echoed through the void between stars, a guarantee that somewhere in the darkness, beings who understood the value of life were listening for calls for help. And when those calls came, they would answer. Because that's what humans do. That's what the galaxy had learned to do. That's what makes survival possible in an indifferent universe.